Okay, I think we will get started. So I wanted to welcome everybody to this year's first community speaker series. My name is Emily Adams and I'm the co-president of the Mercer Elementary School PTO. I want to take a chance to introduce Dr. Rob Adams, Mercer parent, and also my husband. So he's a child therapist at Megan Barlow and Associates in Rocky River, where he's been there for about 4 years. And prior to that, he was a child psychologist at Heritage Professional Associates in Hinsdale, Illinois. So he has worked with kids a lot, and just wanted to take a minute to introduce him and welcome him to this evening's community speaker series. So take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be here and the chance to share with you some of what I get to do on a daily basis, both as a therapist, and my encouragement for you and my hope through some of this presentation is that this can be some stuff that we're all doing in our homes as parents as well. So as Emily said, I'm a child psychologist working mostly with kids ages probably 4 to 16, but work with some older kids and adults as well. Our office is in Rocky River, but especially during COVID, because of virtual sessions, I've been seeing kids from Elyria to Chagrin Falls, so kind of all over the place. Most of the time, I think a lot of the kids that I work with are coping with anxiety, depression, maybe different family disruptions, as well as ADHD, disruptive behavior, and sometimes the autism spectrum as well. So see a variety of kids, really love and enjoy working with kids. And so I'm glad I can share some of that with you today. So I'm gonna share my screen now. And just for a little bit of a layout, I guess we're gonna try to save some time at the end for questions. But I think I'll try to keep an eye on, and Emily will as well, the chat box. If you submit questions during the presentation, I'll try to slow down and address some of those if I can. But also at the end, we'll try to wrap up and make sure we have some time for questions as well. So let me get this stuff going and we'll jump into it. Okay. So emotionally healthy kids post during COVID. Let me just explain real quick why I titled it that way. I think that many of us would say we're still definitely in the midst of COVID, but I think our children, at least what I'm hearing from them in my office, are kind of confused about why we're still in the middle of COVID, because they really thought that we were going to be done with this by now. And so did we probably. And so that's causing some of them different levels of different kinds of distress. Maybe last year it was the distress of being home and back and forth between school. And this year it seems to be some of, why is this still going on and how much longer? And can things become predictable again? And for us adults, and especially for children, when things are predictable, they feel more secure. That is what we like. That's what we prefer. And so that's some of what I want us just to kind of be recognizing, is that even though they are back in the building, and even though they are hopefully able to socialize more and do some more activities, there is still this ongoing question about how much longer, when can all of these things be gone? And so that's just something for us all just to kind of keep in mind, I suppose. So I'm going to start in a very stereotypical therapist way, and I'm going to ask you how you are feeling. And I wish that we could be all in the same room and I could hear your answers, but I'm just going to trust that you are doing these exercises as we go. So I just really want you to sit with, and as a therapist, I'm okay with silence. I'm just going to give you a little bit of silence just to think, like, how are you feeling right now, Wednesday evening, 7:40, something like that. And now I'm just going to ask you to describe that to yourself. Describe, how are you feeling? And now I want you to consider not just an emotion that may have come to your mind, but how, like, what is the process? What is the action of feeling that you might be doing right now? And there's lots of different ways that we as adults feel our emotions. And so here's an analogy I'll give you. If we were in the same room together and I had a cardboard box that was sealed except for a hole in the top, and I got a volunteer and I said, okay, I want you to reach your hand in and grab whatever's inside. Okay, I want you to touch it. Some of you might say no. Some of you, maybe, not me, some of you might just throw your hand right in there and just grab whatever it is right away. Others are going to be a little bit more cautious. You're going to slowly kind of feel around and figure out what's inside. So we all have a different process of going about this action of feeling. And I want you to be aware of that. I hope that you recognize what your process is at this point. And part of our goal is to help our children know what their process is as well. Help them understand that when they are anxious, when they are sad, when they are happy even, that there are different clues, there are different ways that they can recognize that emotion is around, different ways that they can label it and express it. We want them to have these skills. And so this is part of what we are trying to do today, is figure out what are some frames we can use to develop that. And so again, I kind of talked about some of this stuff already, but I want you to kind of be listening for, and this is going to be our focus today, how are we creating an environment, fostering an environment in our homes where kids are developing what is called emotional intelligence. And this is something that is being researched and advocated for by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, led by Dr. Mark Brackett. I'm going to be talking a lot about their work and kind of introducing it to some of you. Some of you, those of you who are Mercer families, you probably have heard some of this because Mercer has adopted some of the emotional intelligence curriculum that the Yale Center uses at Mercer. But I do want you to consider, like, how can some of this stuff be more used at home? Because again, we're not talking about what's going on at school, but what are you doing in your own homes with your kids? So I think that it's all very relevant for all of us. So I want you to recognize that even typically developing children are going through various stressful experiences, even without COVID, right? So developmental tasks are a stressful process. Right now in these elementary ages, they are going through this process of competence versus inferiority. They are trying to develop a sense of competence and confidence in doing difficult tasks. And for some of them, they gain that competence at school. Some of them school, that's really hard to maybe feel competent and confident. And so there is a lot of stress as they go through this process. There is also added to that friendship development and social skills that some of them may be more advanced at than others. There is the emotion awareness and coping that we're trying to work on and talking about today. There is the achievement-based identity that comes as they get older and start to recognize what it means to get different grades and compare themselves to others. And also even in athletics or the arts, what it means to perform well and get that feedback. And do they have a sense of who I am is based upon what I do and how well I do? That can develop even at an early age. And then we have other life stressors that we know happen. And so whether that be COVID or just other family stressors, job changes, moves, illnesses or deaths in the family, all of those things are going to be particularly stressful for a child who is developing the skills to cope and manage these things early on. And so let's talk about how we respond to the typical. And just so that everyone can kind of read this book page. So this page came from a children's book. I did not do this. I grabbed this off the internet. But the book originally said, "I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I was brave instead." And I would say, from my point of view professionally, that that is not a very emotionally intelligent perspective on what we want our kids to be doing with their emotions. Emotional intelligence has to do with being flexible, being accepting of my emotions, being able to tolerate discomfort and know and express and use skills to handle them. So somebody changed this page and now it says, "I wanted to cry, so I did. I was brave and sad." And so there we have greater flexibility and awareness and acceptance. And that's the kind of emotional intelligence that we want to be advocating for and helping to develop in our kids. So part of the way that we do that is we narrate their emotions, we label them for them early on. You know, those preschool, kindergarten, first grade years where they're still developing some of that language. We want to be the narrator that can help them understand what is it that they're feeling? Why is it that their body feels so tight and their fists aren't closed? We want to validate that their emotions perhaps are very real, very big. And we want to help them know that that is an okay experience to have. We want to maybe do that by helping them know when we have felt similarly, and therefore we can instill hope in them that they will not always feel that way. And we can also remind them of times that they have had an emotion, but that emotion did not stay around forever. And so whether that be, again, anxiety, anger, other fears, those types of things. So our job is not to just remove all the pain and discomfort from them, as much as we would like to do that as moms and dads, but to really give them a sense that there is hope, there is a way to manage, and to be true to who they are, even in the midst of maybe a painful experience. And so then we want to provide coping options as well. And we're going to get into some of that later on. But you probably know what some of your coping options are. You probably know what you go to, whether that be an extra cup of coffee, or texting a friend in the middle of the day, or going for a walk outside of work or your house, whatever it might be. Now, some of those options are not available to our kids. I don't think they can wander down to the teacher's lounge to ask for, a cup of coffee or a break, and go for a walk. But we want them to know what options they have, whether they're in the building or not. So again, we'll get into some of those specifics as we go. So here's something I want you to consider, though, and I've already kind of set you up for this by asking you to know how you're feeling. I want you to consider, how is your own emotional health? As hard as it is to accept sometimes, we as parents are the primary model for our kids. And so what we are modeling with our own emotional health, with our own coping options, with our own emotion expression, this is a model to our children of how to do it, or perhaps how not to do it. And we know that to be true at times. And so that second question, like, what is my default mode when they are in distress? I say that we all as parents have different default modes. And we could go into a situation where maybe my kid is really anxious. And we know, okay, that's going to tap into my own frustration to some degree. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to be really calm. I'm going to be really patient today. I'm going to keep my voice up. I'm just going to keep it nice and neutral. But at some point, usually if they are pressing our buttons or if it's going on long enough, we can flip back into kind of what our default mode is. And so for some of that, that might mean our voice gets really loud and we feel more confrontational. For others of us, it might mean we decide to kind of wash our hands of it and say, you know what, you deal with it, I'm walking away. And that can be true when we are in conflict and angry with one another. So we have this default mode. And I want you to know what that is. And if you're not sure what your default mode is, take some time to think about it. You could ask other caregivers in the home. They might have some ideas about what your default mode is, and you might have an idea of what their default mode is. So we want to be aware of what is our response, and is that the emotionally healthy response we want our kids to be mirroring. So another question, are caregivers in the home on the same page? Are we mutually modeling emotional health, emotion regulation, and expression in healthy ways? Or is there some work to do? So that's just something for you to consider as we keep going through this process. So we're going to look at two frames today. We're going to look at emotional intelligence, as I've mentioned, and it's the RULER kind of method. That's an acronym that stands for recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. And I'm going to walk through each of those as we go. And then we're going to talk about the yes brain. And I reference both the books that these two are from, and hope that they could be maybe helpful resources for you now or in the future. I would say they're written really nicely for both parents and professionals. So definitely good things to have at home if you would like. Okay, so emotional intelligence. This is from the book Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, who I mentioned earlier. So let's just walk through these basic ruler skills. Again, Mercer kids are experiencing some of this in their classrooms, but Mercer or not, I think that it's a valuable frame for all of us to be using in our homes. So R is recognize. That's simply being able to put a word to it. I feel blank, you feel blank. I feel mad, you feel mad, whatever it might be. Being able to detect what it is that is that first emotion word that comes to my mind. So you have an emotion right now that you might be able to recognize. You had an emotion maybe when your kids first got home from school and they threw their bag and their shoes all over the place, and you had an emotion that showed up. And you'll have an emotion later today if all of a sudden you're done with this call and you realize they're not asleep and they're jumping all over the place. Like, you're going to have an emotion, so you're going to recognize that. And then you're going to be able to understand, what is it that caused this emotion to show up? Why do I feel this way? And this is hard for kids sometimes. And so we need to start and help them learn some emotion detective work, looking for clues, make a hypothesis. Sometimes that means we do a little trial and error. Sometimes that means that we as parents offer kind of what I call I wonder statements. Like, I wonder if it was this that made you feel upset. I wonder if you were mad that you weren't included when your sister got to go to the play date down the street, things like that. Helping them to recognize, an action or an event or behavior that might be connected to their emotion. And these are things that you can practice in different ways with books and movies. And so there's times where I have pulled up the first few minutes of the movie Up in my office, and if you remember that movie, it's just silent for the first 5 or 10 minutes. And you just watch and you recognize different emotions and you feel it in yourself as the characters go through different joyful and sorrowful events. And so even watching that silently gives you a chance to then pause and say, okay, what's happening inside of you as you watch this? What do you think is happening inside of him, inside of her? And so you can do that with books, you can do that with movies or TV shows. So there's lots of different options out there. But again, being able to practice recognition and understanding, those are good places to start. And then we move into labeling. So we want to add descriptions, add more detail, not just the emotion word, but more descriptions to my internal experience. So Dr. Brackett and others developed this tool that is called the mood meter. And so there are 4 different quadrants, and you determine your quadrant based upon 2 different scales. Is it pleasant or unpleasant, what I am feeling? And is it high energy or low energy? So if I have high energy, but it's an unpleasant experience, I'll be in the red zone. So that might be my anger and my frustration. If I have low energy, but it's unpleasant, then maybe I'm more tired, feeling sick, feeling sad. High energy, but high pleasantness might be excitement and surprise. And low energy, but pleasantness might be feeling calm, ready to learn, content, those types of things. And so even for yourself right now, where are you at? Where are you at on this meter? Are you in the red zone? Are you way into the red zone? Are you way into the green zone? Just being able to describe that with the color and a location helps us to label more details. And that offers information to other people that allows us to be more connected to one another, which allows me to receive some kind of help or support, for some validation, and connect it also to other experiences that I'm having. So if I realize that my physical body, I'm feeling like I've got butterflies in my stomach and I feel nervous, and then maybe I put myself into that low energy, low pleasantness. Now, again, I'm kind of connecting my physical experience and my emotional experience together. And that's some of the emotional intelligence, some of the emotional intelligence skill that we want kids to be able to have. I also ask kids, to take their emotional temperature. They're usually familiar with that idea of taking their body temperature, but where are your emotions at? You feeling really hot right now, like in anger and frustration? Are you feeling more calm? Are you feeling sad? So again, we can kind of use these same colors of green, red being hot, blue being cool. I ask kids to give their emotions a size, a weight, a texture. It's really interesting to hear what kind of texture kids like to come up with for the different emotions. Some of them are spiky, some of them are rough or fluffy, but even that process of giving it these descriptions allows them to interact with their emotions a little differently, to give it a little bit of an externalizing process where it's something that I'm looking at, that I'm analyzing, I'm thinking about and sharing with someone else, instead of just something that is stuck inside of me, okay? And so those are valuable ways to kind of continue labeling and putting information out that way. And so then we want to express, we want to make our emotional experiences known. And we know from research that emotion expression versus kind of keeping it inside, there are emotional and physical health benefits to that, being able to do that in a comfortable and healthy way. But I want us all to remember that there are times when this is risky, because it usually requires a listener. It almost always requires a listener, okay? How many of you have been with another adult perhaps, and you have started to express some type of frustration or anxiety, and you recognize that they're not really listening, and you decide to cut it off? You decide you're not going to fully go down that road because you're not getting the attention and the care that you're hoping for in that moment. you might see a confused look on their face or some other reaction. And so you decide you're not going to go further because emotion expression is kind of a risky process. And so that's true for kids as they are testing out this process. They're watching you and listening to you to see, are you really listening? Are you understanding as you listen? Or are you just trying to quickly move on and address their behavior or get them to move on to whatever you're asking them to do? They're trying to see, is it safe to express something that feels really vulnerable? And are you going to give me the space to express it? Or are you just going to kind of keep jumping in? Am I going to be judged? And we as parents have this opportunity early in our kids' lives to be modeling what a healthy listener is, so that our kids, as they get older, and for those of you that might have older children, you have probably experienced this already, eventually they're not going to want to talk to us as much, right? They're going to want to talk to their friends. They're going to want to talk to their peers at school. And we want them to know what a safe emotion expression relationship looks like. What does it mean to be a good listener? What to look for in their peers as they go through that. Because that's a healthy thing for them to rely upon their peers. But we also want them to be aware of some of these elements and doing it in a healthy way. And so I mentioned a couple things on here about what hinders expression. Sometimes we focus only on behavior and consequences. We just want to move into focusing on, here's what you did. I don't care what you felt. Here's what you did. It was wrong. There's consequences. And sometimes there definitely are consequences and behaviors we need to address. But does it need to be the first thing that we address? Because most likely, if your kid is in emotional distress, if they are overwhelmed in some way, they're not going to be very good listeners themselves at that moment. And the whole point of discipline is to teach, to help them grow and to have some kind of change happen. And we all know that if we are really overwhelmed emotionally, we're not very good at being learners in that moment. And so that's something for you to kind of consider is, do I focus too much first on behavior and consequences? Can I instead focus on the expression and that mutual connection with them to develop the emotional skills? And then we can also work on the behavioral stuff as we need to. Is there a mentality that children should be seen and not heard? Do they really believe that their voice is something that is permitted in the home or in certain situations? We need to be clear and consistent that their voice is important and they have things that they are experiencing. And we want to try to create a healthy sense that there are ways for them to express and get connected that way. So I put technology in here because, even at young ages, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, our kids are accessing technology already. And every year it seems like younger kids in my office are talking about texting with friends or using social media. So I know that this is coming for you, even if you have decided it hasn't entered your house just yet. It will be coming at some point. So I just want you to kind of, the couple times I talk about technology today, in some ways I'm thinking about down the road for you, trying to make sure that you are prepared and thinking intentionally about how your kids are going to intersect with technology. So anyway, when we talk about listening, we talk about watching the other person and doing that kind of back and forth of, are you listening? Are you understanding me? That back and forth is really hard to read when I can't see the other person, when I can't hear their tone of voice, when I can't hear their volume and things like that. And so texting and social media leads to plenty of confusion about what somebody's trying to communicate and are they listening well. And so it's hard to have that back and forth. And I regularly have to have this conversation with kids and teens about what was intended or not intended and how we read social media, how do we read electronic communication. So that's something for you to be teaching your kids as they get older. And then this last thing is just the idea of shame is also a hindrance to emotion expression. Shame being the sense that I am the problem. Not that I did something that was wrong, but that somebody thinks that I am what is wrong. I am the problem, and that's hard to fix. And so that can keep me more closed off. And we want to really do what we can to help our kids be resilient against shame. So I wanted to throw that in as well. All right, now our last ruler skill is regulate. And so that's me knowing that I can have an influence over my emotions in a given moment, whether that be through mindfulness and relaxation strategies, whether it's me remembering or somebody helping me to remember that I did not always feel this way. Remember when you were nervous to go to school and then you got there and then you were having fun and laughing with your friends. That might be hard for your kid to remember in that moment, and we have to help give that prompt to them. We're going to talk about some of these things as we go, but gratitude is a practice that more and more research is showing has a lot of positive mental health benefits. And so even that act of saying, what am I grateful for today? What am I grateful for about my friend, even though he's not sharing very well and I'm kind of mad about that? So gratitude can help us to regulate. The phrase double dip, I talk to kids about how you can have more than one emotion at the same time. You can be nervous about going to school and you can be laughing with your friends on the bus reading from a book of jokes. So I'm nervous, but now I'm also adding a different emotion to my experience. So I'm being double dipped. I'm not just saying this is my only sole experience. And that's important for us to remember, because then that gives us movement. It gives us a chance to say, okay, I gotta find a way to double dip myself. I know the anxiety is already here. I know the anger is already here. How do I create a different emotion in this moment? And then we have this other tool that again comes from Dr. Brackett and the ruler method. And it is taking a meta moment. Meta being able to like think about myself and kind of think about my process. So it really has to do with pausing. So on this outline here, it really starts with, do I sense something? Something happens and then I sense it. What do I do to then pause? And then I have to ask myself, what would my best self be doing right now? Because my anger says, go and push my brother over because he took my Legos. But my best self would probably not do that. My best self would have a different choice. So yes, I feel that emotion, but my best self could make a different choice. So we strategize and then we can succeed. And so that's kind of the process that we can talk our kids through, is helping them to know that they're sensing something and helping to call time out, so to speak, pause with them, and then help them to imagine, okay, what's going to be what your best self wants to do? Not what the anger wants to do, not what the anxiety wants to do, but what your best self might be able to do. So once we notice this and we walk through this with our kids, now they're going through a process of awareness, acceptance, and moving forward with the regulation. And that would be really great for all of our kids. So here's a scenario that I just kind of came up with, just as an example of something that might happen, and wanting to apply some of these ruler skills. So let's say you're at the playground with your kids, or this could be just outside in the neighborhood, and you notice that your kid is angry. And we all know that there's times when you just see it on your kid's face and you know instantly what their emotion is. They might need, again, help recognizing that. So you might say, hey, listen, I hear you yelling. I see you stomping away from your friends. You don't look like you're feeling something very pleasant. I wonder what you're feeling. Well, I feel mad. Okay, so mad, and we're connecting that with all those things. Let's see if we can understand, like, what is it that brought that feeling about? Okay, I feel mad about my friend not wanting to play what I want. Okay, so now we're understanding that this event happened and that mad showed up. And so if I'm asking my kid to then label and describe it in different ways, they might say that they're in the red zone. It's kind of a hot temperature. It's a big feeling right now. It's really spiky. Okay, so all of those things are unpleasant, and we can really validate, like, that doesn't feel very good to have that type of experience when you're little, or when you're big for that matter. And then we're going to ask them to express it. Can you help me understand what's going on? And then maybe we can figure out what to do next. Okay, so I feel mad that they want to play tag because I can never catch them. Okay, so now you give some insight that maybe there's both this anger, there's also maybe this sense of insecurity or not feeling like they're good enough that is there. And so then we can help them regulate by pausing to soothe their body with some deep breaths. We can remember other play options besides the first choice. Maybe there's something besides what your child wants, besides what the other child wants. Maybe there's a third option. And maybe they can be grateful for their friend. Maybe you can help them to remember some things about their friend that they're really thankful for. And that gives them a different perspective. And I mean, if you think about that for your own child, if you are really angry at your child for something, and we've all probably been there, if you were to stop and say 3 or 4 things that I'm grateful for about my kid, it's the same kid that I'm angry at right now that I'm also grateful for in these other ways. That helps me to have a different perspective, to be more flexible. And that's some of the emotional intelligence that we want to keep growing. All right. I hope we're doing okay. I know sometimes I can kind of get going and going a little quickly, so feel free to let me know if there are questions right now. We can do that, but I'm going to keep going and again make sure that we have some time at the end. So yeah, I'm going to keep plowing through. So this is another model that I really utilize a lot in my professional work, and it's probably one of the most commonly recommended books in my office, and it's called The Yes Brain: How to Cultivate Courage and Curiosity and Resilience in Your Child. And this work that is being done by Daniel Siegel and Tina Bryson is called, the official name would be Interpersonal Neurobiology. And so that's a kind of a fancy way of saying, how are brains developing and being impacted by relationships? How is your relationship with your child impacting their brain development in different ways? And so they have a few different books. I recommend all of them, but we're going to talk specifically about the Yes Brain. So the Yes Brain is when I can be in my flexible mode, okay? They talk about a window of tolerance. What can I tolerate? If I can tolerate something, then I'm in my green zone. I'm in this window, and I can be flexible and resilient. So you probably know that you have some kids that can tolerate getting their flu shot. Some of us also have kids that cannot tolerate getting their flu shot, okay? And that becomes a very more distressing situation for them. And so if they're in their yes brain, they don't have to like getting their flu shot. They don't have to want to do it. They don't have to be happy about it, but they can be resilient and willing to do it, even in the midst of maybe some physical pain or some nervousness. Now, if they're in their no brain about this flu shot, they are going to be unwilling. They're going to be fearful. They're going to be very reactive and impulsive and not be willing to manage that discomfort and that distress because it's overwhelming to them, okay? And so when you're in your no brain mode, we have kids that are more in this red zone that we've talked about, where they are yelling, screaming, running around, hitting back at mom and dad, stuff like that. We could also be in the blue zone when we're in our no brain. That's when we might be more sad and withdrawn. So the kid that hides in their room and covers themselves up with blankets, doesn't want to talk to anybody, that's more of that blue zone. And the goal of this yes brain development, I think, ties nicely with emotional intelligence, because we want our kids to be able to recognize what's happening and express it, but we want them to be able to get back to that green zone of what they can tolerate. So if they got this window, we want to get them back into that window, but ultimately we want to grow the size of that window. We want to go from not being able to tolerate the flu shot to being able to tolerate the flu shot just fine. Or other situations, going to school and feeling overwhelmed, to going to school and feeling nervous but still doing it, to going to school and being happy about it. We want to increase the size of what they can tolerate. And so the basics of the yes brain process have to do with balance, resilience, insight, and empathy. And again, just given time, I'm just going to go through these quickly, because we've already kind of talked about some of them when we talk about emotional intelligence. So we start with balance. I got to get a kid back to the green zone before I can really problem solve with them. And again, I deal with this in my office on a weekly basis. When a kid becomes dysregulated, I can't just keep addressing their behavior or saying, here's how to handle a problem differently. Here's what you should have done when you're mad at your mom. Like, I got to get them back to that regulated place first. And so we can do different coping options, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit, to get greater balance. And then we can move to resilience. How do we increase the size of this green zone, this window of tolerance, like I mentioned? And so we as parents need to listen for what is underneath their behavior. What are those emotions that's really going on, and how do we build some of these intelligence skills? And one thing that helps is to make sure that they feel these 4 S's. Do they feel safe? Do they feel seen? You know, that understood listener. Do they feel soothed? That balance that we're trying to create. And do they feel secure in expressing themselves and in the person that they are with? And so one strategy, you know, can we zoom out and shift their perspective to see things through a different perspective, to see what is in your control right now? Like, we can't control what's going to happen when you have a test today, but we can control how you prepare for it. We can control whether you eat a good breakfast and get a good night's sleep. Those are things that we can control. So that's what we're going to focus on to help us be resilient and be better prepared for that thing that's going to come, that still might be uncomfortable, but we're going to approach it with our yes brain. Okay. Next we have insight. So can I observe myself, taking that meta moment to pause, to recognize what is happening, what's happening inside of me, and am I being reactive? Am I being flexible? We're going to use those observations to help move into a more flexible response. So do we as parents support the pause like we talked about with that meta moment? And then, or do we kind of, I guess, do we sometimes just move too quickly into problem solving and just say, here's how you get over this. Here's what you should do, instead of fully helping them to have that insight that they don't have yet, and we're trying to develop it. And then empathy. We all want our kids to have empathy. We want them to move from that me perspective to we, and it's appropriate developmentally for them to start with that me perspective, and we want to keep cultivating more of that we understanding. So do you take the time as a family to talk about one another's emotions and how you impact one another, to notice the clues? Do they know what their brother or sister's clues are? If they don't, that'd be a great thing for them to learn. Now, some of you might tell me, you might say, oh, they know what their clues are, and that gives them a signal to go harder, right? Some of them just like to keep pressing buttons when they see those clues. So yes, we need to address that. And yes, that's what siblings do sometimes. But we want to make sure that they are aware of what these things mean when they see that their brother is stomping his feet, or their sister is starting to cry and get really quiet. And so we kind of help develop that empathy by slowing down and kind of like we talked about before, watching movies, reading books, and noticing what are the other emotions that are going on in the moment. And so when we talk about our yes brain, let me see if I can kind of quickly do this model for you. I teach kids to use their hand to describe their upstairs brain is their fingers, the downstairs brain is the base of their hand, and the big anger or anxiety that they're feeling is shooting out from their thumb. And what we want to do is use these two things together. This is kind of like their brain, okay? Their upstairs brain is here behind their forehead. Their downstairs brain is deep down inside, way back here. And so sometimes we get really overwhelmed and we flip our lid. That emotion shoots out and off we go. And this is a model that I use with kids and help them to teach, okay, let's do something to get that thinking brain more involved. That thinking brain, which is our upstairs brain, that's where we can solve problems, where we can think and rationalize and look at facts. Our downstairs brain is where it's just those big emotions that like to shoot out. It's more impulsive, it's more reactive and passionate. So there's different strategies that we can do to jumpstart our upstairs brain. I don't think with our first and second and third graders, we're going to ask them to count backwards from 300 by 3. But you could start in a different frame. And as they get older, maybe you work yourself up to that. But how many of them can just count to 10 like that? They don't even have to think about it. And then they say, okay, I counted to 10. Now I'm still mad. So we want to give them something that requires a little bit more thinking, a little bit more work for their brain to do. Because ultimately we want to ask, like, what is my emotion telling me to do? And what's my thinking brain telling me to do? And what's the outcome that each of those actions is going to lead to? So that when I can integrate my knowing and my feeling, my upstairs and my downstairs brain, that's when I'm using my more full brain or our wise mind. And that's when we have more balance and effectiveness. So that's what we're going for. So I've got some slides just to kind of talk about different ways to keep supporting emotional health. And as I go through these, again, some of them may be familiar to you, other ones may be new. I'm going to go through some of these quickly because I want to get to some of my more intervention steps at the end. So talking about emotions is really important, as we've already mentioned. Giving them permission to choose emotion regulation. Not just focusing on behavior and problem solving, but saying, okay, let's regulate first. Sometimes we as adults don't give them enough time and space to do that. Do we have regular check-ins, and do we talk about being mindful, being aware of our emotions as a family? So even going for a mindful walk, I send kids on walks all the time. And I say, when you walk the first side of a block from one corner to the next, you're just going to focus on how many colors you see, what shapes you can notice. So the whole sense of vision. And then you turn the corner in the next block, you're just going to focus on what you hear, how many different bird calls, what the wind sounds like, things like that. So take turns describing what your senses are noticing. That's a mindfulness practice that can be helpful and something you could do as a family. Using your relationship is really important. It is one of the most powerful regulatory forces in your home. So do you connect with them and provide that emotional safety through that connection first when they are dysregulated, when they are emotionally overwhelmed? Do you create that eye contact, that contact comfort of a parent's hand or a hug or that physical closeness? Do you remind them of the time when they were courageous and flexible? These are ways that you can connect with how you know them best, and connecting with them helps to, again, create that safety that can move into some of the other skills that we're trying to work on. It's important, I think, for kids to have some really concrete ideas of what to do to communicate and to cope. Do they know exactly what is a helpful way to describe to mom or dad what they're feeling and what is an unhelpful way? Saying, my brother's an idiot, that doesn't really do a great job of expressing what happened, and tell mom and dad what you're feeling. So maybe we need to come up with some different words, even though that might be describing what they're feeling at the moment in some ways. Do they have specific places to go and tools to use? What do you have in your home? Do you have some type of calming corner or toolbox that they know they can go to when they need it? Stress balls, those geometric mandalas that they can color allows them to focus on something. And I have seen kids just regulate more as they put their mind to something and regulate for a while before being able to express. So again, we're modeling acceptance and empathy as we go through this process with our kids. I'm just going to mention briefly, there's some researchers at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago that was looking at what was this impact that COVID has had on our kids. And they surveyed thousands of parents and asking, and the biggest issues impacting kids' mental health had to do with social isolation, remote schooling, and too much screen time. And the good news is that we're kind of improving, or we have improved in a lot of these areas. And there are going to be, of course, some kids who are going to be more affected by this COVID period than others due to family strains, actually loss of family members or other medical needs or mental health needs. But if you look at these pillars that have been most compromised, I want you to keep these in mind as we continue through this, COVID time, because I don't know what's coming, right? I wish I did. But there may be time when your kid has to quarantine. There may be times when your family has to quarantine as a whole, or, decide not to do activities in the wintertime based upon who knows what. So these are some of the most compromised pillars of mental health: socializing, exercising, eating well, sleeping well. Like, these are some of the basics for all of us, no matter our age, that affects our mental health. And so again, some of these things we have to limit in different ways due to COVID, but as you consider how do we keep our kids and healthy, but also support their mental health, recognize that these are some important pillars to take into consideration. And I'll just mention some positive signs that they noticed, is that there was an increase in quality parent-child time and parent affection, as well as more kids practicing mindfulness and relaxation skills. And so those are, encouraging things as a mental health provider to know that families are being intentional in those ways. So if your kids are struggling, here are some things that you might see that go above and beyond some of the typical development we've been talking about. Greater nervousness and uncertainty. And hopefully now that we've been in school for a month or so, we're kind of past some of that, but there still is the question of, are things going to change? You may be more easily fatigued by common stressors because there has been chronic stress, and you might notice that about yourselves as well. Are they more irritable, lacking effective coping skills, trouble adjusting to change and social situations, maybe still developing some of those social skills because of time away from peers, as well as academic challenges that maybe are expected for some and exacerbated, and others maybe it's unexpected as they get back into the school year and have some academic challenges. So these are things to kind of be aware of. So now these next two slides, I kind of have some examples of a symptom of a specific, area of distress, maybe anxiety or depression or anger, and some interventions that I might consider with each of them. And so I'm not sure, now that I'm just thinking about it, I don't know if my slides are going to be made available, but I'm sure that they can be. So I'll talk to Emily about that and make sure that if there's a way for that to be possible, that can be done. Because I know that I'm kind of going through some of this quickly as we get near our ending time. But you'll notice a theme in these interventions that have to do with physical relaxation, through breathing, through your senses. Like these are things that are always with you. And I think that's helpful about them, is you could be in your car and you can do breathing. You don't have to have the special toolbox. You could go walk to the bathroom, whether at your friend's house or grandma's house or your own house, and get a cool towel and put it on your face and on your neck to cool your body down. We talk a lot about opposites. My emotion makes me feel hot, so I need to cool down. It makes me feel like I'm going fast, and so I need to slow down. I'm getting loud, so I need to quiet down. A lot of those opposites with our senses can be helpful. Helping kids to remember times that they have not been worried, or when they were worried and brave, as we talked about before, having that flexibility. Giving them some specific task to do, color this picture, even something as simple as that. Spell your name backwards. Look at the bookshelf and find the letters of your name in order. Like these basic things that help them just to give their brain and their body a task to do, helps them to regulate first. So sometimes we need to be removed from the situation. When we have a big angry outburst, we need to get away from whatever it is that is triggering us. But then again, we move into some of those relaxation skills and figuring out what are some smaller steps that we can take to make the problem smaller ultimately. With task avoidance, we want to approach cope. We don't want to just avoid, we want to approach. So can we notice our emotions and our thoughts and challenge the ones that we need to in order to find small steps towards the goal and do it in a slower process perhaps? Same thing with being withdrawn socially. How do we challenge some of the thoughts that we might be having about what people think about me or what situations have happened in the past and whether or not they're necessarily going to happen again? So we as parents need to sometimes go through this challenging process with them. And the same thing, not just with what I think about my peers, but also what I think about myself. Can I challenge these thoughts and look for the evidence? Can I be grateful for myself? Can I have this growth mindset that says, well, maybe I'm not as fast of a reader yet. I'm still working on it. There is that yet that says there is still room for growth that I need to be aware of. Do I jump to conclusions? Am I predicting the future? Like that type of language. So instead, I need to focus more on the facts, what is in my control in that moment. That's going to be more helpful rather than that prediction about what someone else is thinking or what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. So here's some things just to highlight and keep in your minds regarding when maybe additional steps are needed. These are things that I look for as a clinician and that you as parents can be looking for if your kid needs to maybe meet with a professional in some way. So is there significant change in their functioning, whether that be behavioral, physical, social functioning? Has there been a big change? Is there a lot of resistance to using the tools that you are making available in that growth that you're trying to do through developing emotional intelligence? Is there a lot of resistance and ineffectiveness when it comes to using them? Of course, if you have any history of self-harm concern for your child, that's a good time to consult with a professional, as well as knowing your own family history of mental illness or trauma that can impact a family's overall health and the influences on your kid. As well as physical symptoms. That's another thing to be looking for. If they do not seem to lessen with different interventions, whether that be vomiting or dizziness, racing heart, that might be a good time for more intervention as well. And as a psychologist, I really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with schools, with pediatricians, with psychiatrists, whoever I feel like can be part of the team. And I think that's really helpful for your child to know that there is a team of people looking out for them. And so if you can help foster some of that collaboration and maybe even develop a specific game plan for what is going to happen when they're in distress at school, if that's the case, that gives them a sense of security that they don't have to express all of their needs and come up with the 5 steps they need in that moment of distress, that they already know that there's somebody that can implement that plan right away. That would be, I think, more ideal for me. So that's just something, some encouragement for collaborating with, whether it be teachers, whether it be a private therapist or whoever else you think would be helpful. And lastly, let me just go back to this special topic of technology as you think ahead, again, to the future. Here are some of the things that I notice in my practice that are issues that I have with technology and how it impacts emotional health. Using social media and technology really can give me less time to really sit with my emotions, because I find that kids are pursuing some type of resolution right away. They're just looking for something to make them change their emotion, instead of actually being aware of their emotion fully and accepting that it's there and that it's valid and it has information for them. So they're seeking immediate support or relief, but not always in healthy ways. So they might lash out due to the social distance that makes them think that it's more acceptable. And some of the hurtful banter that we see on social media can happen when I'm in my emotionally distressed place. And I'm not going to do that on the playground at school, but, or in the halls at school, or maybe even, in my friend's home. But through social media and electronic communication, I'm more likely to do that. And that's now going to lead to some different problems. So that's just, again, part of the learning and things I want you to be aware of for either now for older children, or down the road. I see kids who are just anxiously searching social media for some type of affirmation for themselves, whether it be likes or retweets, and it's not really helping them to handle a situation in more effective ways, or to express themselves. And then there's also patterns that I see of kids sharing amongst themselves about their own mental health struggles. And they may, again, not at their age, always know the really appropriate ways to do that and who can give them the appropriate help. So they might be sharing about self-harm or suicidal thoughts. They might be just sharing about how they hate themselves or hate their school. And other kids their age are not always equipped to manage some of those things. So that's just an important thing for you to consider as parents, is how are we teaching our kids how to have a healthy relationship with technology, including social media, including what is the emotional engagement you're going to have with this thing, and make sure that you have this healthy relationship with it. So those are just some things that, again, we could probably have a whole nother hour about technology, and maybe some of you would want to someday. But at least that's just kind of some things I want you to kind of keep in mind as you approach that, particularly those of you with older elementary kids. So I've got some references. I'll leave this up for a minute. These are just different books that I often recommend, including the ones that we talked about today. And then the only other thing I have is just a chance for us to have a little Q&A if we want to do that. So I'm sorry if I missed anything that came through the chat box, but it's about 8:25, so I want to respect your time and know that there's probably plenty of other things for your evenings as well. So yeah, I guess I'll just kind of look for any questions through the chat box. That might be the easiest way rather than talking over each other. You're muted, Em.
I was going to say there haven't been many questions yet, but a couple people had to sign up early and said thank you so much for all of this information. It's been helpful and this has been great. So
I'm going to take this the screen share down now, but again, if it's possible for us to make this stuff available, happy to do that, and hope that it can be, again, a helpful launching point for, again, kind of that skill development for your kids. We teach them reading, we teach them motor skills in very specific ways and try to cultivate that. And I think it's really important that we be doing that with their emotional lives and emotional skills as well. So hopefully this gives you some language and some tools to use. It's an ongoing process, but yeah, hopefully it's a good start. Anything else? Yeah, there's no questions.
no, I don't think so. Just on behalf of the Mercer Elementary PTO, thank you so much for volunteering your time. And yeah, do you want to pass out your contact information in case anybody wanted to message you privately or anything?
Yeah, I realized I forgot to put that on. So why don't I will enter that into the chat, just so I don't have to spell it all out. So the email is rob@drmeganbarlow.com. That's my professional email. And it's Dr. Megan, Meghan, Barlow. So just take a look in the chat, but my email's there. I'm happy to follow up or offer recommendations if needed. And yeah, glad you guys could join.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording and hope everybody has a great night. Thanks from Mercer.